Number one is to avoid avoidance. Let me rephrase that. Number one is to avoid extreme avoidance. We who have Asperger syndrome are prone to avoid other people. There's nothing that I see that's particularly wrong with that. There's some things that are hurtful, so we try to stay away from them. But when we try to stay away from everybody all the time, with very few exceptions, I think that goes overboard. We're trying to cope with Asperger syndrome, and sometimes we just do it the wrong way. And avoiding too much, extreme avoidance, is not the way to cope with it. But to avoid extreme avoidance is a way to cope with it. Now, there was a guy by the name of Christopher Thomas Knight. This is back in 1986. He was a 20-year-old. And he decided that he was going to drive to the woods in Maine, a place that was isolated. There were a few cabins around back in the woods. But other than that, this was a place where he knew he could go and be totally by himself. He was going to avoid everybody. Now, here's the problem. He stayed there for 27 years. I mean, he found a place back in the woods that was hidden by rocks, glacier rocks. And at night, he would go out and he would burglarize these cabins. He would steal food or whatever he needed from the cabins. Never more than what he actually needed. But yeah, he did this for 27 years. People knew he was there. He was called the ghost of the lake or something like that. 27 years, he was totally, absolutely, positively avoidant, all by himself, alone. He said there was one time, after he was captured, there was one time when he encountered two hikers and he said hi to them. But outside of that, he didn't speak to any human being whatsoever. Then he was captured and they put him in jail for, I think it was 6 months, for his burglaring activity. All right, that's kind of extreme. I don't know anybody who goes to that extreme, but I think we would all avoid, or that we would all agree, rather, that that is extreme avoidance. I can't imagine anybody saying, other than Christopher Knight himself, and even he may have changed his mind, but I can't think of anybody as saying, yeah, that's okay. That's not extreme. I think we all agree with that. So if we do, then we all agree that there is an extreme to avoidance. Well, there's another extreme where there's no avoidance. We try to immerse ourselves with people all the time. Well, somewhere between those two extremes are balances for particular individuals. And people with Asperger syndrome, we would, on this particular spectrum of extreme avoidance and extreme non-avoidance, but somewhere in between there is where we need to be. We need to find our spot and make sure that we don't go too far either direction. So how is it that we are to cope with having Asperger syndrome? What we are to do is to find our spot on the avoidance spectrum. How much is too much and how much is too little? And a good way to, I think, explain this is, there's a good way to avoid getting traffic tickets. And when you say that to people, their ears perk up. Ah, you got a secret. Yeah, I got a secret. Don't speed. When you drive, you can avoid traffic tickets, by and large, by not speeding. Okay, there are a few exceptions where you have a bad cop or somebody who's not paying attention pull you over. But when I was driving the speed limit, when I have been driving the speed limit, I've never been pulled over for speeding, ever. So that's a good avoidance strategy. Now there's another avoidance strategy for not getting speeding tickets, and that is never drive. Just stay home all the time. You'll never get a speeding ticket. I think that is too extreme. So I think we all understand that this principle of going too far one way or the other. Number one, avoid extreme avoidance. Another way to cope with Asperger syndrome is what I call tribal support. We're not going to talk about this very long, just a minute, but when I talk about tribal support, what I'm saying is this is where this is where we go the other direction. So we find support, we find tribal support in, say, our family. We may have a few close friends. We may have some neighbors that we're close to. We may have some associates if you have a job or something else. So we have this, call it a tribe. These are people who we can depend on, who we are close to. Yeah, we may not trust all of them, but there's always a few, or there seems to always be a few people that we can trust on. Number two, tribal support. Number three is avoid toxic people. This is the one time where I think, and again, I'm basing this on life experience. You know, I'm 70 years old, nearly so. And over these decades, I've learned a thing or two that I'm sharing with you. And one of the things that I've learned is to avoid toxic individuals. And when I mean toxic, I mean toxic. I don't mean avoid people just because you don't like them or because they annoy you or because they make you nervous, but I mean they are truly toxic. I can think of one person. A lot of people I like to stay away from, but I can think of one person in my entire life who is so toxic that, and I mentioned this in a video, I think, just yesterday, but this person is so toxic rather that I won't even mention the person's gender. If this person is in a room, I won't go into the room. If this person is in a place, I won't go to that place. Now, that seems very extreme, but the person is so toxic that it has that effect on me. So what to do when someone is that extremely toxic is you have to then, I think, apply extreme avoidance. I mean, what else can you do? If somebody is carrying a disease and it's communicable, they have a virus and you know it, and if you get close to them, you will catch it and you will die from it, or it will make you miserable for the rest of your life, or maybe just make you sick for like, I don't know, 2 years. Somebody has the smallpox, and you know it, and you're not immune. What do? You stay away from them. Just that simple. And nobody says, oh, you're not being considerate, you're not being kind, you should be nice to this person, even though it's going to cost you your life or your health. I don't think so. And you know, there are some people that are just that toxic, where it doesn't give us smallpox, but it could give us it could result in extreme depression. So how do you cope with Asperger syndrome? One way to cope is to avoid those very few toxic people. And again, I know thousands of people. Very few that I know very well, but I know thousands of people. But I can only think of one that is just that toxic. Number four, I think this one is really important, and that is to know yourself. Okay, that sounds silly, doesn't it? Sounds like a motivational speaker. You need to know yourself. Well, hang on a second. Let's stop and think about this. You have a computer, right? I'm assuming you do because you're watching this, or you have a cell phone or device of some kind. And let's say you have your desktop computer, maybe a laptop, and you download a new program. And what you discover is you don't know how to use this new program because it's new to you. And it becomes extremely frustrating. And until you learn how to use the computer program, it's going to be frustrating every time you try. You got to get to know it. Think of Asperger syndrome as a program, and you've had a lifetime to get used to it, to get accustomed to it, to learn how it works. And I think if you're like most Aspies I know, you are doing a phenomenal job running your Asperger syndrome program. Most Aspies I know, you know, they still have their frustrations, but yeah, they're getting along pretty well, all things considering. But some people with Asperger syndrome, they just don't try. They say, well, you know, I'm withdrawn. I don't get along with people very well. Wish I did. I can't work a job because if I do, it only lasts like a few days or a few weeks at the best, and I just give up. This is too frustrating. Well, I think that is because they haven't bothered to learn how their program works, know how Asperger syndrome works. Okay, well, how do you do that? Well, I'm assuming you're doing that right now by virtue of the fact that you're watching the video. So you're already onto it. But sometimes we need a little bit more than that, and that is why I always encourage people to seek out professional help. Talk about that in just a moment. Number five is something that just came to mind while I was preparing the notes for this presentation. And that is keep your head out of the clouds. That's good advice that parents give to their children. As they grow up, they say, look, keep your head out of the clouds. What exactly does that mean? Well, I think what that means is, and this applies to people with Asperger syndrome, because we tend to care. We tend to be sensitive in an affectionate way. We tend to care more than others. And because of that, we will sometimes inject ourselves into altruistic movements. There's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes when we do, it becomes an obsession. We just can't let go of it. We become fanatics. We are attracted and we are held by this delusion that we can somehow save the world from itself. We can save humanity from really making a mess out of things. And we're a part of this movement that is doing just that. And so we become so entrenched and so obsessed with our mission that it really hurts us. And people with Asperger syndrome need to understand that they are vulnerable to those types of movements. And I don't know what it is. Things come to the top of my head. Maybe it's social justice movement, or maybe it's saving the planet movement. Maybe it's a religious movement. Maybe it's a political movement. There's all kinds of movements you get involved in. And, well, they make you feel like you're belonging to something. You're a part of it. And you're accomplishing something. You're saving the world. How convenient. But the reason you're attracted to those movements probably is because you're vulnerable in the first place. And the reason you are held into those movements is because you were vulnerable. You like hanging out with people, which you don't get that anywhere else. This is the place where you can go and not have to avoid people. But the danger of that is the movement itself can be all-encompassing. It can be very damaging. So they recruit vulnerable people like us, vulnerable people like us, because we crave companionship that the group provides. But once we're drawn in, that's when the danger comes, because we are easily manipulated. I know people who give up, don't know them personally, but I know of people who have given up all their possessions. Now, some of us, that would be not a whole lot. It'd be like an old van. That's what you get. But I know people who have had substantial possessions, and they give it to the group because there's this group dynamic. We're in this together. We are saving the world from itself. And I got to tell you, that is futile. I'm pretty sure I can't save the world. And so I need to get my head out of the clouds, come back to reality, get my feet on the ground, be centered, and realize that life is what it is, and people are going to do what they do, and there's nothing wrong with helping people. And really, there's nothing wrong with being part of a movement. It's that obsession that really hurts us. Number 6 is this. This, I think, is probably kind of obvious, and I'm guessing that most of the people I know who have Asperger syndrome, including you, are probably already doing this, but let's mention it nonetheless, and that is number 6. Do something that you enjoy. Now, what do you enjoy doing? I mean, what is it that you do that makes you happy? Now, some people would say, well, making lots of money makes me happy, but that's not what I'm talking about. I like listening to music. That makes me happy, puts me in a good mood. Probably a better way to phrase it, rather than what makes you happy, is what puts you in a good mood. Some people like crafts and arts. Some people like to knit. Some people like to read. Some people like, what am I missing here? Some people like, did I mention write? Some people like to write. Some people have pets. They enjoy playing with their pets. What we need to do is to cope with Asperger syndrome is focus at least a portion of our time, probably daily, part of our life, make it part of our life, to take time for ourselves and do those things that put us in a good mood. Has tremendous help on me. When I'm in a bad mood, I just put on my headset which I wear, by the way, because I'm in a neighborhood where you hear dogs barking and trains passing, so it kind of blocks out the excess noise. That's why I wear a headset. That I'm too cheap to buy an expensive microphone. But just put on your headset, listening to music. That's what puts me in a good mood. And I do that just about every day. Now, eating may put you in a good mood, but some things, you just get into too good of a mood. So you don't want to eat to excess. Same thing with, I encourage people, just don't touch alcohol, period. Not one single drop. Alcoholic beverages I'm talking about. Well, it puts me in a good mood. Drugs, marijuana, just leave that stuff alone. That's not the type of good mood we're talking about. Number 7 is this. And we touched on this just a moment ago, and that is seek out professional help. Again, this should be something that is very obvious. But so what? We still need to mention it because it's something that helps us cope with Asperger syndrome. If you have a serious headache, what are you going to do? Right now, if you had a headache, had a migraine, some other kind of headache, I get migraines all the time. You know what I do? The first side of that headache, I go take some Advil. Usually 3, I don't know how many milligrams that is or whatever, but I usually take 3 pills. I'm not advising you do that, but I'm saying that if you have a headache and it's severe, it's going to be, you probably have the sense to take some pills, right? But what if it's an extreme headache? You may have noticed I have this little indentation on the side of my head here. That's because a few years ago I was trimming hedges up on a ladder and I leaned in and the ladder leaned out and I fell several feet. I didn't think a whole lot of it. I just got up and found my shoes after I fell hard enough to knock my shoes off, and I tried to find my glasses. I normally wear glasses, and I was a little stiff, but I put the ladder up, put my tools up, went back in the house, and I started getting a headache, and it got very severe. But I do what I do when I get headaches. I take Advil, but it didn't go away. Man, I'm getting sick, and I said something to my wife, and she said, "We better take you to the emergency room." And I felt so stupid. Okay, we're going to go to the emergency room, and they're going to tell me to take Advil or some painkiller, and I already did. All right, my wife insisted. So we went to the emergency room, and they put me on a helicopter, and they flew me to have emergency brain surgery, and I went into a coma on the way to the hospital. The point is, sometimes you need something more than self-help. Sometimes you have emergencies, and it's good to have an emergency room, a psychological emergency room. So think of a therapist as not somebody you go see every day, but in extreme cases, you need to seek, my opinion, you need to seek out professional help. I mean, if I hadn't gone to the emergency room, I would have died. Within hours, I would have been dead. And I'm not saying you will be that severe of a condition, but hey, if you break an arm or a leg or whatever, go to the emergency room. And nobody says, "Oh, you're a flawed person because you sought help." Same thing is true if you're having problems related to Asperger syndrome, such as depression. You need somebody to talk to who actually knows what they're talking about. And I think YouTube is a good place to start, but it's not a good replacement for professional help. And you see those 2 rectangles on the screen, so we don't have to end our conversation unless you want to. Let's keep talking. Just click on one of those rectangles and the conversation will continue, and we'll see you next time.